Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm really excited about today's guest. Today I'm going to be chatting with Beth Blackwood. Beth is the CEO of AISWA, an amazing organization that supports educators in Australia. And Beth's going to explain a bit more about that in a moment. But welcome to the podcast, Beth.
Thank you, Jono.
Now, first of all, I just want to say this, that And I think I mentioned this to you when we first chatted, but I've heard great things about your organisation, and about the authenticity of the community and the way you support educators. So I just want to start off by saying thank you for the very important work that you do, and for how you're doing it. Those are things that I've heard anecdotally through the grapevine.
Oh, look, thank you. And it's so nice to get that feedback, because this is an association that gave me so much in my leadership years, that to now be able to give back is the greatest privilege and pleasure. So it's nice to hear that feedback.
Yeah. So first of all, can you tell us a bit about the association and also what you do as CEO?
Certainly. So AISWA stands for the Association of Heads of Independent Schools of Australia. And so its members are, as it indicates, heads of independent schools across all states. We do have some overseas membership as well, particularly from New Zealand. One of the chief criteria for being a member is that heads have the autonomy to manage their schools. So the heads in our schools are not parts of systems necessarily, and they report directly to a board. So, they have responsibility for the day-to-day management of their schools and responsibility to governance, in that they report directly to boards. So we have approximately 450 members from across Australia. As a little bit of background, I was once a member of AISWA myself. I was a head of an independent K-12 school for girls for 19 years. And so, as I said before, being able to give back to this organisation has been a real privilege. So the association, I'll refer to it as AISWA because it's just too much of a mouthful to say Association of Heads of Independent Schools of Australia each time. But the association is primarily there to support heads in their leadership of their school communities. And there are three significant ways in which we do that as an association. One is to provide communications, advice, reflections, articles that may support leaders in their roles in their schools. That's in the form of bulletins and our website. We also provide professional learning for principals and for those who may be aspiring to leadership as well. So apart from COVID years, we usually have at least one major conference a year, and we run a series of webinars, workshops, sessions for members and broader community of educators. And the third string to our bow is that we provide advocacy. So we're based in Canberra because the majority of funding for independent schools is from the federal government, and so we seek to influence and consult and advise on national affairs that impact on education of our young.
Amazing. Yeah. What an organization. And it's so lovely to hear the legacy of the organization with you and now how you're giving back. So let's chat about you, Beth. I want to hear, as a starting point, if you go back to your childhood, to growing up, what are some of those moments or even themes from that season of your life that have really shaped you to become the leader and the person you are today?
Look, I think the dominant theme that shaped me growing up was being born in the era of the 50s and 60s, where expectations of women were significantly stereotyped, and opportunities were much narrower than they are today. So the feminist movement that arose as a result, I think, of those constricting conformities expected of women in the 50s and 60s, and which I saw impacted on my mother and other women around me, really shaped who I am. I was determined that I would carve my own way in the world, and that I wanted to be able to make decisions about myself and not necessarily have to conform to what the expectations were of women at that particular time. So if I think back to my childhood, that's what really shaped me. I had a mother who would have loved to have had a career
Yeah.
and fell in line with what the expectations of women were at that time. And I saw the frustration and ultimate disappointment that that created for her in the life that she led. That it really fired my enthusiasm for feminism, which ultimately led to my leading a school for girls.
That's so yeah, really appreciate you sharing that. So wonderful and vulnerable of you to share that. I'm interested to know what has changed dramatically since then for women in leadership, and what still needs to change as someone who
Mm,
grew up in that time and now has led in really significant roles and continues to. What
mm,
has dramatically changed and what still needs to change?
mm. I think the opportunities for women have changed dramatically. I think that women are not constrained by the three essential choices that women had when I was growing up if they wished to work. It was, secretarial nursing or teaching. So the breadth of opportunity and the breadth of choices has really opened up for women. I think that gender equity is generally accepted in our society. However, there are still many, many challenges. If we look at the number of women in leadership roles in ASX companies, for example, we see women are underrepresented. Women are underrepresented in politics and so many other fields that I could name today. So we have a long way to go to achieving true equality. And of course, we have the scourge of domestic violence that impacts primarily on women, prevalent in our society and prevalent in other Western societies at this point in time as well. So it is somewhat frustrating to feel that we've moved a long way in some ways, and in other ways, we haven't moved very far at all.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's I think you've what you shared there is really insightful. If we go back to your story, when was your first opportunity, or as someone put it when I asked this question, when was the first time you realized you were in an opportunity to lead? The first chance you had to manage a group of people, the first time you were really able to take a project and sort of lead that project, cast vision. Do you remember when that first significant opportunity was for you?
Yes, I can. I mean, there are obviously opportunities all through school. There are leaderships of sports teams and debating, and I think all of those are really important in kind of formative experiences. But the first professional leadership experience was as director of a boarding house in a private girls' school in Melbourne, and I actually fell into that role. uh, the position was advertised in the paper, as positions were advertised in those days, and it was advertised as a director of sporting activities. And I read it to mean that it was a role that would primarily occur at weekends, leading the sporting activities of young girls living in this boarding house. At the time, I was looking to go back to university and looking for a way to be able to support part-time studies. So it seemed like a golden opportunity. And when I approached the school to ask for further information, they said, of course, you realise that that was an error in our advertisement and the role is actually director of the boarding house. I said, oh, yes, of course.
Of
Of course,
course.
I realised that. And the rest is history. I applied for the position. I was appointed, so I found myself leading a boarding school of over 100 adolescent teenage girls, and
Wow.
a staff team of approximately a dozen women.
I just love that story. You do. Of course, you realize that we made a mistake. We said something, heading up the sport. It's actually the director of the boarding house. You realize that, don't you? Oh, I think the number of times, Beth, I've chatted with people and they point back to an accidental, either where they accidentally stepped into something or someone accidentally gave them a role, just makes me laugh because and it's really encouraging for me because sometimes as leaders, we feel like we have to be so strategic and intentional, and we do. But also, I think if we're just aware of the opportunities and around us, that's just who would have thought stepping into a role like that that you would, that's just a fantastic first opportunity. That's one of my
Mm.
favorites I've heard. Thank you.
No, not at all. And, it was a pivotal moment. And, I learnt so much from that leadership position. And I also learnt to seize opportunities when they were there as well. That was a really good
Mm.
outcome of that position. I in no way felt prepared for the challenges of it, but somehow I had the gall, I think, to step up and say, well, I'll give this a go.
Yeah, that's a good word for and a good thing that any leader can can develop. And uh, interested to know, what were the biggest lessons? That can't have been easy as a first leadership opportunity. That's not a sort of gentle, here, have a go at this. That's 100 adolescents. Suddenly, you're the director of a boarding house. That's a big.
Hmm,
I imagine it must have been a bit of a deep end experience. What were the biggest lessons that have stuck with you from that
yeah.
time?
I think the biggest lessons were around relationships, and no matter what leadership position you're in, it comes back to relationships, relationships, relationships. And in a boarding community, you have that unique opportunity to build very strong relationships with your team. So I guess there are two elements to leadership there. One is about relationships and building trust. And the second one is that you cannot do everything yourself. You need to be able to work with a positive team behind you. So that was one lesson I learned. The other lesson I learned was that leadership is not about popularity. I thought I was relatively young at that point in time, and I saw myself as being able to relate quite easily with 100 adolescent girls. But it doesn't quite work out that way when you're the one who has the responsibility and duty of care for those young people. And so I quickly learned that it's not about popularity. It's about, in that situation, being seen to be fair and being respected.
Mm. What have you learnt since then about how to lead in a way that develops, that is fair? Because I love that word. I think that's a fantastic word to use around leadership. Because just a quick segue before I come back to ask you this, one of my favorite books that I talk about a lot in the podcast is Blue Ocean Strategy. And I
Mm-hmm.
love a lot about that book and about that idea of strategic planning that they talk about. But the thing that I almost found most helpful from that book is they talk about when you're rolling out a really innovative transformational strategic plan, where people go wrong comes down to these two words that they use, and they say it's about unfair process. When people feel like the process has been unfair, you lose them. And that's why I love that word fair, because we can talk about all these other words, but if you step into the shoes of your people, and if they feel like it's a fair process, then people can agree passionately, disagree passionately, and a lot of the time you can still have good conversations. So that's why I love that word. But what have you learned about that idea of how to lead in a way that's fair, and how to develop respect as a leader in a healthy way?
I think processes is part of it, and being a somewhat rebellious teenager, I think the notion of having policies and processes and guidelines was an anathema to me until I stepped into a leadership position, and I saw how essential it was that there are policies and processes that determine outcomes, and that they provide a foundation for fairness, so that no matter what the situation is, there's a process or a policy that has due regard and respect for the people that are engaged in it, that is followed um, in all circumstances. So I think having a set of principles and policies that are the foundation of leadership is important.
Mm. Yeah, I agree, and I think it's pretty simple. It's not easy, but I think it's pretty simple if you
No.
can make those things really clear, and then follow through in a fair way about how you uphold those things. That's a great starting point. In fact, that's something I reflect on for me as a leader. I think that's something I could have done a lot better. I love saying to people outside of Australia that it's really easy, particularly when you start in a role or you start someone else in a job that's you've been waiting to fill, and finally they step into the role. It's easy to say, she'll be right, as the Aussie sort of quip goes, and say, you know what, they're such a great person. I'm so excited to finally have this off my plate. I could, do those extra couple of things or spend that extra bit of time, but I really want to move on to the other things. So now we've got this in place, great. Let's sort of move on. And I found for me that's been such a big mistake, because whether it's in the early time of someone stepping into a role, or whether it's more about processes across an organization, if you can just get it really clear from the start, even if it feels a bit tedious at times, if you can just make it really clear, then it makes all the accountability, all the conversations when something's being questioned, so much easier.
I think so, and it's building trust is around consistency and being seen to be reliable. So it helps build those relationships that you depend on as a leader.
So after you took this director of boarding role and you were in the deep end and you learnt so much that you've just explained, take us on a bit of the journey from there about what you went and did, and maybe I'm interested to know from there, what was the next sort of big leap for you as a leader, where
Mm.
you went, wow, okay, this is another big stretch for me as a leader.
Well, the director of boarding house placed me in a school, and as I alluded to earlier, I'd been determined I wasn't going to be a teacher because that's what was expected of me. And so, up until that point in time, I had been in social work roles. And this was my first experience of an all girls school, and it just opened my mind to the possibilities for young women. This was an exciting time in the school where women were educated to look at broader horizons than the narrow one that I had in my own school years. And so in instead of pursuing the law degree, which is what I had intended to do, I found myself drawn into education and understanding how fundamental an education is to the opportunities that our youth have later in life, and therefore what could be more important than educating our young people. So I veered away from law and took on a diploma of education, and so my next step, I then moved into a dual teaching boarding role in another school, and my next step in leadership was as deputy principal. So I moved from director of boarders to deputy principal at that particular school in Hobart. So that was the next step in leadership.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. So let me ask you, as a bit of an overview of your journey since that director of boarding role, starting with, like you described, that next role in Hobart. I wonder if you can think of, I wonder if any aha moments pop into your head where you were deputy or you were the principal, or in your role since at AISWA, those sort of moments where it's a turning point or the penny really drops, where you go through something or you're part of a process or you see something and it really burns into your memory about something to do with leadership. Any moments come to mind, Beth?
I can remember one moment where the principal of the school in Melbourne, in a conversation, mentioned to me that I had the potential to be a school leader. Now, I had not really considered that until that point in time, but it wasn't so much that he said I had the potential to be a school leader. It was the following statement: but you need to start believing in yourself. So that was a real aha moment. And I think it allowed for reflection of who I am, what my values were, and what I wanted to achieve. So it was a significant moment.
And what did that look like for you to live that out? Obviously, that was the penny drop sort of moment to step into that. But then, what did that process look like? Because I can imagine leaders listening, going, "Oh wow, maybe that's what I need to do." Because until you mentioned that story, they'd never thought of themselves as being the leader in their industry or the leader of
Hmm.
their company, and going,
Hmm.
maybe I could do that. What was involved in going on that journey,
Yeah.
Beth?
Um, I'll comment firstly that I think was a really generous thing to say. And one of the things that I have tried to do in my leadership is to encourage and nurture leadership in others, and to have others believe in themselves as well. I think up until that point in time, my leadership style was more about appeasing, about trying to keep everybody happy. And it goes with my earlier comments about trying to be popular as well. So having belief in oneself was really about stopping and thinking that I needed to know what was important to me. I needed to be true to myself, and I needed to connect my career or my leadership with my own set of values and passions. So it caused me to reflect on who I was, and where I wanted to go forward. And of course, at that particular time, my interests, my passions centred around ensuring that there were every opportunity for women to be whatever they chose to be, providing they had the aptitude and the willingness to the work ethic to achieve that. So that's where my passion sat. It sat comfortably with leadership in environments that well, initially in schools that were educating girls.
Yeah, I think this is what I've found with people's values is I often find they are very simple things. I don't mean simple as in uh, I just mean simple as in sometimes with values or what we're passionate about. My experience is that when someone really understands it and learns what it is and then they articulate it, it sounds just like what you described, which sounds, hearing it, you go, oh yeah, that makes sense that Beth's so passionate about that. But having that revelation for yourself is such an amazing compass. I know for me, I talk about, I always wrestled because I'm so passionate about organizational structures and I love the sort of the living organism of of an organization and how things work. But I always thought that's not what I'm really about. I mean, that's what I love doing a lot of work around that, but it never quite sat right with me until one day I remember just as I was pondering this, realizing, you know what it's about. I'm so passionate about organizations because I know that when an organization is really healthy in its structure, that people can really fulfill their potential. And and that just was like a similar moment for me where I realized if I can invest in people to fulfill their potential, whether that's through, and so that's been a wonderful compass. Now, once again, that doesn't sound like the most revolutionary phrase, but for me, that's been life changing.
Hmm. Hmm. And look, I agree. It's not as simple as you say, but it was my guiding light in those early years. But of course, it broadened across my career as well. You know, I would say that another really important value to me was around community and the belief that schools are communities, and it's within those communities that young people learn what the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship are. And so that notion of strengthening, building community so that those young people go beyond school and wherever they may be, they understand the strengths of being part of a community and contributing to a community became another passion of mine.
Yeah, that's so profound. And that's why one of the things I've probably learned from this podcast, actually, I've had a lot of educators on here, and it's probably reminded me in some ways, but also I feel like my uh, sort of my understanding of the significance that education plays in changing people's lives and changing the world has probably grown from this podcast because I've started thinking sort of in this way, like what else makes as big of a transformational difference in people's lives in the community and across the world than education?
I've lost you.
Oh, have you got me back?
Yes, I've got you back now.
Yes. Okay. Sorry about that. Must have
That's
dropped
all
out.
right.
Well, my next question for you, Beth, I'm interested to know who who comes to mind as a wonderful leader that you worked with, that you still might work with, who was a mentor to you at the start of your career? Any, I'm sure there are many, but anyone that springs to mind who was a particularly important mentor or leader that you admired through your career so far?
Mm. Look, I've been fortunate. I've had many mentors across my career, um, and I think they play such an important role in supporting and sustaining one's leadership. So it's difficult to choose one, but I'm going to go back to that first person who tapped me on the shoulder and said, you know, you could be a principal if. And that was David Loader, who was the principal of MLC in Kew at the time. And I think what David taught me about leadership was that it was genuinely a collaborative process in the school. So he taught me about being collaborative, being consultative, and he was a true innovator. He was the first, or MLCQ was the first school in the world to introduce a one-on-one laptop program to their students. So he was a big sky thinker. And he was always stretching and asking why, how. So it was an inquiring mind. So it wasn't just the collaboration. It was about bringing people together, but it was also about extending them, challenging them to think about what we have now and what the possibilities might be. So he was and continues to be a significant influence on my leadership and my thinking.
Yeah, that's amazing about the laptops. Are there any stories
Mm.
of David? Any other stories that come to mind? Uh, I guess as you're thinking, anything that where he led change management, any ways or stories about how he dealt with stakeholders, or the way he sort of implemented those sort of big innovative ideas and made them actually happen. Any specific stories that pop to mind for you?
Um, I think we go back. I go back to with change management of influencing and stepping people through change. And I think David was, a master at that, of planting a seed, of that seed being well researched, well evidenced, but then putting that idea out there and inviting people to engage with it. So there was never a sense that he had determined this is the way it was going to be. It was a sense of, this is what I know, this is where I think we'd like to be, but how do we get there? And people genuinely being engaged in that process of how to get there.
Mm,
And that's not an easy thing to do. I was always challenged by change management. And
mm.
I think in my own leadership style, I was probably always too keen to come up with the answers rather than what's the issue we're trying to solve here and how can we work together to solve it. So he was a great exemplar of somebody who led in that manner.
Yeah, I found that really hard too, and I have so much respect for that process. It's not easy
No,
because
it's not.
I don't know about you. I know most leaders out there can probably resonate with this. You Once you start looking at a challenge, particularly when you're in a more senior leadership role, it's very hard not to come to conclusions, and you start making decisions, even if you're trying to hold them loosely. It then becomes very difficult when you bring some really great thinkers from your team and the wider team and stakeholders together, and someone questions something, and you go, "Oh wow, I'm struggling to wrap that into the things that I'm realizing now are probably a bit more fully formed than than they should be."
That's right. And being open-minded is just such an important trait to have, to be able to listen to others, to other people's perspectives, to being open to being challenged. I think that is a really important leadership trait.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know if there'll be anything off the top of your head, but how did
Mm.
David do that when he was running these processes? I find that process in particular really fascinating. Was there anything that you observed specifically about how he was able to bring these bring the problem together to a group and collaborate and invite them in? How did he do that?
Small. He worked with small groups, so he may have started. I've seen him present to all staff on a particular issue, but then across time work with the smaller groups, then give, and communication, of course, is the key to all of this. So working with smaller groups, gathering ideas, gathering different ideas, coming back to the larger group. It seemed to me that David always took time. He wasn't trying to change overnight. So he allowed for those conversations to take place. And I think that one-on-one laptop that he introduced is a good example of that. I mean, that was significant change that involved a whole range of stakeholders, from the teachers to the students to the parent body. And so it was working with each of those groups, listening to their concerns, addressing those concerns, taking the time to come back to feedback, so that by the time a decision is made, people feel that they have been heard and that there has been a consultative process as part of that decision making.
Incredible. That's that right there. That little snippet that you just unpacked could be. I wish I'd heard that 10 years ago or 15 years ago in some of the. Just that little process you described, I think, is so valuable. It's gold. Well, let's jump into Leadership Express. I'm really enjoying this conversation with you. I've just got a handful of questions for you. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. First of all, what's a book that you've gifted to other people, Beth?
The book that I've gifted the most, and this is to other leaders, other school leaders, so although I think there is something in the book for everybody, it's a book written by Father Chris Gleason called A Canopy of Stars, Some Reflections for the Journey. So Father Chris is a Jesuit priest. He was headmaster of Xavier in Melbourne and went on to be headmaster at Riverview in Sydney. And A Canopy of Stars are reflections on experiences that he had in his journey as an educator. There are writings of others, there are prayers, there are narratives around students and parent interactions, and it's uplifting. It's a book full of hope and optimism and belief in young people. It's one of those things that you could pick up and just read 2 pages at a time and feel inspired by it. And it has, obviously, being written by a Jesuit priest, it has a spiritual element to it, so it speaks to the soul as well.
Yeah, wonderful. That's a lovely recommendation. I haven't had that one before. So next question, do you have any favorite questions that you ask? You're in a one-on-one with someone, you are, dealing with some stakeholders, or you're with a team. Any favorite questions you like to ask?
One that I fall back on sometimes is there anything you were expecting me to ask that I haven't?
Yeah, I like that. I like that because I think questions like that can be important sometimes when you think, how can I draw something out that might not otherwise come out? And that's a really good one. I've had a similar question before, actually. I'm just trying to remember how they phrased it, but it was a very similar idea. I can't remember what they said, but yeah, you're not the first leader to share that. I think there's great wisdom in that. So here's another question for you. What is a commonly held belief in education that you passionately disagree with?
The current deficit model of education that is communicated by our politicians and by and large by our media. The belief that we are failing, I think, to quote one of our politicians, that we have failed a generation of students. I do not hold to that at all. There are wonderful teachers in our schools. Our schools do an absolutely amazing job of seeking to value every child and provide every child with an education worth having. So the deficit model that we see, that we're failing in PISA, that we're failing in NAPLAN, that we're failing in school management is an anathema to me, because I don't believe we are failing. I think education is in a stage of transformation. We're moving from an industrial model of education to one that will better equip our students for a world of constant change. And, through that transformation, there are going to be changes in emphasis, and changes in priorities. And I think that's what we're seeing, not a deficit model, where I see young people coming out of our schools and that astound me. They are genuine inquirers. They are engaged. They are community minded and community spirited. They are generous, and they are looking to thrive. They're responsible young people. So I think that that belief that education is failing students in Australia is an absolute anathema, and it's not what I see before my eyes. And whatever school I go into, I see energy, I see drive, I see passion, I see young people who are engaged and who are learning. And you would hope are learning for life, learning to enjoy the process so that it is a lifetime enjoyment.
Wow, well, that is a wonderful thought, and I really appreciate you sharing that. It's a because there are things like that about the deficit that can be just, oh yeah, you agree with, but I think you make some wonderful points there. And knowing myself, I know a lot of fantastic educators and school leaders. I agree, there are incredible people leading and teaching our students, and there are incredible students coming through. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, a couple more questions. What's a big struggle or problem that educational leaders are facing right now?
Look, it's a complex world, and I think that 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 in itself presents real challenges for leaders today. To me, there are so many things we could talk about. Social media, we could talk about consent, we could talk about pornography. There are so many complex issues, the climate, environment. There's so many complex issues that leaders are facing today. But I think sort of a bigger picture to me for school leaders is dealing all the time with this tension between the the what are perceived to be the values of our broader society, our culture, values of instant fame and gratification, as compared to the timeless values that leaders are seeking to instill in young people, the values of being honourable, being honest, having integrity, and so forth. Those timeless values that almost seem to be set against what our young people are consuming out there on the broader social networks.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's one of the big challenges. The other side of that for me is particularly as virtual reality becomes
Mm,
more
mm-hmm,
of a reality, and
mm.
I really see virtual reality being another level of transformation. And I see the opportunity. I think the challenge is if we're going to innovate in some of these spaces, you just hit the nail on the head talking about the disparity between some of these really true values that in schools that we're talking about, and the values that we're espousing on some of these platforms. And I think the question is, how do we have more of an impact, and what does it look like outside of education, across the world, to bring some more of these values onto these platforms? What does that look like? I don't know what the answer is necessarily, but I think there's an incredible opportunity there, because if we can do more of that, then I think it will really help. Not saying it's easy, but I see that as a massive opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. If we just look at civility, grace, kindness, we need more of that in our general society. Certainly, we're educating for those skills in our schools, or those values in our schools, but we need the weight of corporations and politicians and media to support those values, and to encourage the instilling of those values in our broader community.
Yeah, absolutely. Really wonderful thought. Last question.
We can't leave it to schools alone, I guess, is my,
I agree. Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it's very true. Last question. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say?
Grab whatever opportunities present themselves. I think too often we kind of step back thinking, no, I can't do that, or I haven't got the skills for that quite yet, particularly women. So my one piece of advice is to seek out and or grab whatever opportunities there may be for leadership, and jump in the deep end. There are plenty of people around to support you. There are plenty of resources to acquire the knowledge and skills that you may have. But unless you take that opportunity in the first place, you'll never know what your own capabilities are. You'll never challenge yourself, in other words.
Yes. That's wonderful advice. Thank you for sharing that. For those who have really enjoyed hearing from you today, Beth, where can people find you online and find out more about AISWA?
Well, AISWA has its own dedicated website. People can find me online in LinkedIn. And AISWA has a Twitter feed as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. I know educators would have loved this, but what I've really enjoyed about today is that for those who have no connection currently in their role to education, it's been so profound hearing from Beth telling stories and leadership principles. So I want to thank our listeners. Don't forget, I also have the John O. White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, which you can also check out to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Beth, for sharing just wonderful stories, like I said, from your life and your career. And I think you'll inspire a lot of leaders with what you've shared today. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, John.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me, well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 questions on leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time. And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you, and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.